All right, here we go. This is going to be recorded. I will email everybody who registered. We had about 82 people registered. We'll probably get to 40 or 50 here in the next couple minutes. It's about half. Anybody who registered though, and you guys will all receive a link to the recording, which will be available for 30 days. If you guys want to send it around, please, I want you to post it all over social media if you enjoy what you're about to see between me and Drew, and hopefully mostly Drew is going to be talking here today. I recognize a lot of names in the chat. I appreciate everybody being on the webinar with us. We try to do this about once a month. I try to find a special guest, whether it's about human trafficking, forensic genetic genealogy, mental health of law enforcement, and field training. That's a passion of mine. But it's just a way to kind of give back, but also grow the advanced police concepts community. I'm excited about the growth of the company. Most of you know where we've been and where we're going. My name is Mike Schentrup, and we've been in a lot of places. It'll be over about 20 states now before this year is out. And of course, we have a pretty significant online presence too. We do mostly investigative training, right? We do a lot of interview and interrogation, human trafficking, cold case, homicide, child sexual exploitation, overdose investigations. But we also do a lot of leadership and field training officer training. So if you're interested in any of those, we're always looking for host sites. We're really booking now 2024. It's kind of late, unless we want to get maybe an early December class, if you feel we need to get it in now, if that's something you're interested in. But we're really looking to start booking. We are already at booking 2024. Last thing, APC collaboration. It's a favorite of mine. It's a closed Facebook group. All right. You have to be a law enforcement officer or a civilian crime analyst, a forensic crime scene to be part of this group. You have to answer some questions. I have to let you in. We post a lot of free content on interview interrogation, again, human trafficking, sexual assault, leadership. And it's just our way to kind of give back without putting it all out there on regular Facebook. All right, I'm super excited about our guest, or my guest today, right? And let me tell you a little bit about Drew. I'm going to let him do a little bit more introduction later, but let me tell you how I met him. My son is in the 101st. He's a sergeant there. In fact, he's about to get out. But he introduced me to Drew several months ago, and this kid does not speak highly of most people in general. But he's a really nice guy. But he really spoke so highly of Drew, who was his company commander at one point. And I was like, I got to meet this guy. So we set up a meeting, and we talked for a little bit. And I said, I definitely got to get this guy to talk a little bit about leadership and what he thinks are the important aspects, because leadership is part science, but it's a lot of art, and everybody kind of has a different idea of the most important aspects of leadership. So this is really just going to be somewhat of a guided discussion between me and him. And I have a kind of few questions to get started, but we'll kind of see where it goes. And of course, I'll be monitoring the chat box. Please, if you have a point, share it. Everybody can see the chat box. So this is really an ability for everybody to get together and kind of talk to each other and talk about leadership. All right, without that, I'm going to close out I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And it's going to be just me and you, Captain. And I'm going to go ahead and take a couple minutes to introduce yourself and tell them who you are and what you do and stuff like that.
Sounds good. So good morning, everybody. My name is Drew Buffalino. I'm a captain, branch infantry. I've been in the Army for over 8 years now. Started out at Fort Hood, Texas in the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. And then from there, I went to 1st Ranger Battalion, where I served as a platoon leader, and then did some staff work and deployed to Afghanistan twice in different roles. And then most recently was at the 101st and was a company commander for around 25 months. One was with the Rifle Company, where the one that Mike's son was in, and then I was a brigade headquarters company commander, which is a little bit more diverse because you have senior ranking officers in your company that you're trying to work with. So the leadership dynamic is a little bit different. And now I'm going to school at UT Austin, and following graduating from school, I'll go and teach at West Point.
Oh, is that it? Oh, okay.
Yep.
Just West Point. All right. Hey, where did you go to college? Where'd you do your undergrad at, Drew?
I went to college at Monmouth University. It's a
Okay.
pretty small school in New Jersey.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So we're going to jump into some of these kind of questions that we kind of talked about a little bit. And I love this question first, right? And I'm going to do it in two parts. So we're going to do one part first, and then I'm going to do a second part later. And I'll tell you both parts in the beginning, though, is that what leadership attributes do you value most for yourself and then for somebody you work for? That's part one. But part two, let's talk about those attributes that you look for if you're building a team. Like who are like your they'd be your subordinates, and but you're kind of handpicking a team. What attributes? That'd be part two. What attributes are you looking in them, or and are they the same?
So for attributes myself, the first thing is trust, and it's not just trust, but it's trust through predictability. And what I mean by that is people need to know what they're expecting every day, and there's got to be some type of a pattern to that. So it's building expectation management, and that can come in a lot of different ways. It could be as simple as having being the same person every day and not letting the things that happen at home affect you when you come into the office. It could be, when you first come into a role, doing counselings with everybody to lay out what your expectations are, or if you don't necessarily, if say you're new to a role and you don't really know what you're getting into, then it could just be a conversation between what they expect of you and, drawing those lines between each other. Or it could be, having a consistent schedule or just letting people know when things are changing, or if you're instituting change, it's allowing it time to set in so that people know that it's coming. Um, but overall, like the number one important thing I think is trust through predictability and being the same person. But then it's also a little bit of emotional intelligence, and I think that's the one that a lot of people miss, is the empathy and understanding what role each position in your team, what that person's going through, and trying to put yourself in their shoes to understand more about them, or just knowing about their personal life. So if they come in and they're acting a different way, like it's not that they're just being a bad soldier that day. They could have something that affected them at home, and that level of just emotional intelligence and understanding each person in your formation, I think helps feed into that overall one of trust. And then the last one that I'll hit on outside of teamwork and just working with outside organizations is humility. I think is another big one that a lot of people miss, because being a leader and being able to ask for and receive honest feedback from the people that you're leading, I think is really the driving factor between like an organization going from something that's mediocre to something that's great. Because there's a lot of leaders out there that will just direct and think that they know everything and act like the smartest person in the room and not ask for feedback, or be afraid to ask for feedback, or yeah, just avoid the conversations overall to not look weak. And that overall kind of feeds into transparency. It's letting the people that you're leading know what you're lacking, so that they have an understanding of where they might need to be helping you out to drive into that overall teamwork. And that really comes down to just asking for feedback, and whether it's something that you can improve on personally or something the organization can improve on as a whole that you can try to affect, I think are important aspects of you yourself leading the formation. To the second question of what you look for in someone that's that you're working for, I think it's a combination of, again, emotional intelligence and then just curiosity. Someone with the self-awareness to know that as they get to the higher levels, that they might have forgotten what it's like to be at the lower levels, or things might have changed in the lower levels.
Wow. Okay. Wow. I love how you call that curiosity.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I mean that's a big one for cops. I mean that's all they talk about is he forgot where he came from and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's again that self-awareness, or just the humility to realize that things might have changed over the years since you were in the lower positions, and just being curious about what those changes are, and then again feeding back into the humility aspect of it, of realizing that you might not be the smartest person in the room on this topic, just based off of how much time has gone by since it was when you did it. Um, so just remaining open to the people below you, informing you of those changes, and then having that constant growth of staying tied in and self-aware and and knowledgeable of how things are now, not necessarily how they were 10 years ago or even 5 years ago.
Right.
And
Right.
then
Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, and the last one, what I look for um, in subordinates or people that I'm leading is people that don't withhold information for their own personal gain. I think is the biggest one. Ones that are constantly sharing lessons learned, writing them down, passing them around to other people. Um, it was one of the first things that I counseled my lieutenants on when I got there, and a lot of the non-commissioned officers too. Was I'm looking for someone that can figure out that can solve problems and then take the problems that they've solved and share them with everybody else so that they learn on those, and realizing that it's not just about how well they're doing, it's about how well they're making the team as a whole work together. And if that, if you can make that expand to being outside of just our company and affecting other companies around you, then that's who I'm going to pick to be, the top squad leader or the top lieutenant. It's someone that is thinking not just in terms of their own platoon or their own squad, but they're thinking, how do I increase the overall performance of not just the people in my team, but how do I figure out how to solve the problems within my team and then share them to other parts of the formation to help them grow and get better.
Those are, I mean, I don't even know where to start. I'm like, wow, okay. Um, going back to your first thing about the idea of trust, I love, and then you kind of combine two things. I talk about trust and then I talk about being consistent, right? I think that's kind of where you're at. And we've all worked for bosses and you don't know, you like walk in that day and he's got a different look on his face. You're like, okay, we're not asking that person any questions today. We're just going to stay out of their way because they're having a bad day. We hated working for those. It was like Jekyll and Hyde. You don't know what you're getting into. But I like the idea of being consistent because we get that word fair thrown at us all the time. But I really think it's more about being consistent in your decision making as
Mm-hmm.
best as you can. And it's not always perfect. But I love and the relationship aspect. This is the question I did have. It just popped back into my head. This is an old head. It's 1 year older right now. So you had about 120 people in your company. Is that about right?
Yeah, at one point it got up to 170 when we were getting ready to deploy to Europe, but it was,
Wow.
yeah, it was anywhere
Okay.
from, yeah.
So what is your thought process? And this goes to law enforcement officers. You move up through the ranks. Like for me, I didn't have 170, but as a bureau commander, I had about 80 people working for me at the end. How do you
Mhm.
go about developing relationships, and how far down the line do you try to extend those relationships?
I think the relationships are different based on the levels. So for example, like with my platoon leaders, who were probably the closest relationship, it was, having them in my office and talking to them quarterly, or after I would do my initial counseling where I would sit there and talk to them about, we'd start off every counseling in a certain way. We would talk about personal life. So we'd get to know each other better. Then if it was the initial counseling, I would lay out, what my expectations of them were, what they should expect from me, and then I'd leave it open to any questions that they have or like any recommendation that they have of how to do things better. But like the performance counselings would be a similar format. It would start out with personal life, getting to know them better, and then really using that as an opening of like, is there anything going on in your life that might be affecting your performance before we get into the other performance aspects of it, to understand, if their performance went down, why that might be. And then it was what they did well and what I think they can improve on. And then at the end, going back to the humility portion of it, it was what I asked them what I could be doing better or what the organization could be doing better. And that was in a closed room, and it allowed them that one-on-one privacy of being honest with me. But and it was very similar for platoon sergeants also, because again, those were the closest relationships. But for everybody else, it was just taking the time to walk around and, like, you're trooping the line. You're going up to people. You put out directions and guidance, and then you want to try to do it in the least intimidating way possible, so that it leaves people open. But it's just going up and talking to people and asking them how things are going, what they're doing, trying to make it in a way that's one, non-threatening, so that they're giving you honest feedback, um, and then always leaving it open for them to give recommendations. Because like you mentioned earlier, if you have a boss that comes in and you can tell his mood's off that day, and your instant decision is, I don't want to bring problems to this guy. But if you're a leader and people aren't bringing problems to you, then you're not really leading them. It's you're limiting your improvement by doing that. So you always want to be consistent, and then just by to reach the lower levels, it's either through by walking around and just talking and having those conversations with them throughout the day, or you could even set it up to where if you have time in your schedule to bring in different levels of leadership and turn it into a meeting where you take a team leader from every platoon, or you take and do almost like a sensing session. But I think that especially as you get higher up in the chain of command is one of the more important things, because not doing those things is how you lose your connection to the lower levels, and it might lead you to making a decision that doesn't reach the outcome that you're looking for, because you don't know what the ground reality is of those decisions. So it definitely gets more difficult as you go up. And I had a brigade commander who I asked the same question to, and he's in charge of 4,000 people, and his answer would be, when he was in Romania, he would drive around, and if there was a soldier at a bus stop, he would just pick up the soldier and be like, hey, where do you need to ride to? And then in that car ride, he would drive him and just ask him questions about how things are going. And usually, like, even though it gets more difficult because you don't have as much touch points with the lower ranks, they're generally more honest with you because they're so far separated from you that they don't think that they can really affect their job. So in those moments, those car rides, you would get some pretty good insights into what was actually going on and what was being tactfully said to him in other ways. But
and I think the humility aspect, and this is something, humility is not something I even thought about up until about 10 years ago. Because I honestly, I lack humility. There's no doubt. And that's something I've had to kind of really work on. And I think when you ask for feedback, because I always ask for feedback at those same meetings, those quarterly kind of check-in sessions where your direct reports. And at first, I wasn't getting any. Oh, you're doing a great job, Sarge. You're doing a great job. No, there's no problems. But then I realized they might not trust me enough at that moment to give me honest feedback, because they don't want it to be like, oh, boss got defensive, or boss is going to hold this against me, right? Mm-hmm. So honest feedback, when you can get it, I mean, it's a gift. It really is a gift.
Yeah, and it really comes down to building trust to be able to get it. Because like you said, if you're being a different person every day, or they fear that you might lash out at them or get defensive on them, it's not just in that meeting. It's the combination of everything that you do outside of that meeting that allows them to understand. Because when you first come in, if your subordinates don't really know you, they'll test things out. They'll try to give you feedback, and if anytime, I would always place that with really high importance, is if someone's giving me feedback, whether I agree with it or not, I'm listening to it and I'm saying thank you for telling me that. And it was the same thing. It was kind of like a holistic approach, because one thing that I did when I came into the company that your son was in was I made it known throughout the formation that we're all humans, we're all faulted, and we're all going to make mistakes. And the way that we keep each other in check is by, if we see one of us making a mistake, then we correct each other. And I made that known by, speaking to the whole formation. Like, if you see me messing up, I'm going to have bad days too. I want you to come correct me on the things that I'm messing up at. And making that known, and making that an environment where it's not that I'm not in a leadership position because I'm a smarter person. Well, I'm having more experience, but I'm not, there's things that I'm not smart on. There's things I'm going to make mistakes on, and we're all humans. And that, that a private should feel perfectly comfortable coming up to me and saying, hey, sir, you didn't clean your weapon fully. You need to go clean this. And when they do that, you say, thank you. Like you're absolutely right. I turned in a dirty weapon. Like I'm gonna go clean this right now because that's the right thing to do. And
that's amazing, because I think even though early on I would ask for feedback, probably some facial expressions would probably be like, oh, I don't know if I touched a nerve with Sarge here. So
mhm,
it's really, I mean, you can't be said more that you cannot get defensive, right? You have to be super open to the feedback. And the other thing you said is that you can make a statement like that, and we've had plenty of bosses say, this is what I realized. Bosses would be like, oh, I've made a lot of mistakes in my career. But then you ask them, well, name one. Well, then they can't. All of a sudden, now they make these generalizations about mistakes, as
mhm.
opposed, like, I can enumerate mistakes, like, oh yeah, I made mistake here, 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 and here.
Mhm.
But what you did was you made an announcement about this idea of you can come to anybody can make a mistake, and we should all be able to hold each other accountable. But if you don't act it when the private says, hey, your gun's dirty, then it
Mhm.
just blows it out of the water, right?
Yep. Yeah, and that starts to erode the trust. And yeah, I had a thought, but it just left my head. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, let's move on. I think we talked about that one. What are your ideas on followership, right? Supporting your boss when decisions are made that your troops don't like. And do you have any real life decisions where a boss came down with a decision that you knew was not going to go over well? And how do
Mhm.
you support the boss but support the troops at the same time?
So I think this feeds into the whole disconnection thing because the disconnection goes both ways. The lower levels don't understand the upper levels, and the upper levels are so far removed from the lower levels that they don't understand it. So as a leader that's in the middle of both of those, you kind of need to be the liaison between both parties. And what that means is, when you're going to your boss, you're representing your formation, and when you're going to your formation, you're representing your boss. So if you go to your boss and your boss makes a decision that doesn't seem to make sense, I think it's your responsibility to either offer up different solutions that better fit in with the reality of it. But at the end of the day, if those solutions or those problems aren't adopted, then when you go back to your formation, again, you need to maintain trust and honesty. So if it's a decision, like what I would always do is if it was a decision where it just didn't make sense and we knew it was going to go badly, I would generally tell my formation, I don't understand why this decision is being made. It might be something that none of us understand, but at the end of the day, like we're going to do it because the boss told us to do it. And I think doing that is more important than trying to get fully on board with the idea or trying to paint a bad idea as a good idea. Because if you try to paint a bad idea as a good idea, then the soldiers, they understand that, and it kind of erodes trust in your own critical thinking, because they're going to be really confused as to why you think this bad idea is such a good idea. So being honest with them and saying like, look, I don't think this is a good idea either, but at the end of the day, like this is the decision that was made and this is what we're doing. Um, they I think they know and respect that more often because they experience it with their squad leaders or their team leaders when they do it. Um, and at the end of the day, like they're it from that point on, it's just about motivating them. And the phrase I'd always use: if you can't get out of something, get into it, and just still accomplishing the mission or trying to make the best out of it. But I think the honesty in and transparency of communicating when you don't understand the decision that's being made either, but it's your duty to do it is important.
Now, let me ask you a question. We talk about this idea of why a decision was made. Have you had a situation where the bosses tell you, basically, I don't have to explain why to you. This is just the way we're going to do it. Because I love what you said about you're that kind of conduit. Because I talked to this about middle managers, and I talked to the sergeants about this. Is sometimes you want to see that 30,000 foot view to not just pile on, to help these subordinates know maybe why a decision was made, and let's look at that through the chief or the major's or the colonel's perspective. Let's look at it at a higher level, and maybe these are some of the reasons that decision was made. But have you had a situation where your boss wouldn't even tell you the why? I mean, because I think even an explanation, whether you agree with or not, of what the why is important.
It is, yeah, and there's been plenty of situations like that.
Oh, really?
Um,
Okay.
yeah, well, just one example is when we were deploying to Europe, we started getting told around December to get ready to deploy, and then it kept expanding to we think we're going, but we don't have orders yet, and then we didn't get orders until a few days before we got on the planes. So something as big as that at the time, I didn't understand why it was taking so long to get orders, and I kind of just had to fall back on my past experiences of going through spin ups before and then nothing happening, and in those situations, I would just try to give them all the information that I had
I see what you're saying.
and give them constant updates and then constantly seek for more information. So eventually I found like talked to high enough people to know like what the process is for dedicating troops to certain areas and why it takes so long. And then like over time, so initially you might not know what the answer is, but I think it's your responsibility to constantly seek that information as things go on. Um, but at the end of the day, if you get told to do something, you don't get the why, you need to use your critical thinking skills to try to figure out the why and best explain it to them. And then at the end of the day, if you don't know, then it just comes down to, I don't know, but I'm
No, you're right.
going to
I mean,
find
I
out
think you have to be
later, and
honest
we
with
still
them.
have
Yeah.
a reason. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Hmm.
you have to be honest with them, right? Maybe this isn't the way I would do it, but so and so is the boss, and it's not illegal, unethical, immoral, but this is what they want, and let's go ahead and do it the best we can. And once we get a little feedback, we can go back to the boss and tell them why it is working or not working. I love that one.
Yep.
All right. What are your thoughts on building the bench and mentoring young leaders?
I think no matter what position one of your subordinates is in, you should always be training them for their next duty position. And I think that you accomplish that by getting leader buy-in. So one of in different planning operations. So one of the like from the military aspect, we would do our operations order planning, and in a lot of the military schools, they would teach company commanders to do all the planning on their own and then give the order. What we did differently was I broke down the different pieces of it and then gave it to, like, just talking about between me and my lieutenants. I broke down different pieces of that operations order and had them plan different parts of it, and then it wasn't any like the essential parts where it was my role to plan it, but doing like enemy analysis or doing terrain analysis or um, understanding the higher level missions or where our adjacent units were, I would have them do it, and then provide feedback. And it not only made the planning process more efficient, but it got them involved in understanding what their roles were going to be when they were a company commander, because they got a little piece of each one. So I think, and that's just related to lieutenants, but the same case for the weapons squad leader, like him planning his support by fire, but then also understanding how to backfill the platoon sergeant if the platoon sergeant were to go down, and having a piece of that planning aspect. So I think one, asking people, making sure that people are doing the jobs that they're in, but then also trying to expand on it and know the higher up jobs, and then just overall leader buy-in and planning. So again, I'm not a law enforcement officer, so I don't really know how that would relate to the law enforcement world, but it
No,
could
it's
be,
it's pretty similar.
yeah, it could be as simple as, if you have people in your formation that are filling in a role of expertise, then you make them fill that role to the best of their ability and push them to learn more in that role. And then through the counselings or through different feedback sessions, you either expand on what they did or try to like give them the transparency of letting them know what you were thinking and why they were having to react to the problems that they were reacting to give them the more holistic view, to get the bigger picture to develop and to just know more about what's going on around them.
Yeah, and I think when you go back to trust, that trust thing, the feedback goes both ways, right? you're receiving feedback from them, but they're much more receptive to feedback if they trust you have their best interest in heart, and they just don't feel like you're picking on them and stuff like that. I think trust and that feedback is important when it goes both directions.
Mhm.
For sure. All right. I guess I missed a part of that followership. Do you mind if I go back for a second?
Yeah.
Because I get this a lot, right? I teach a lot about the idea of leading up, or leading with your boss and stuff like that, which means just building a good relationship with them. But where does it go? Because this is the other question, and I'll tell you a quick story about this idea of leading up versus kissing up or sucking up, right? I made lieutenant, and one of my friends, and she had been my friend for years. She was a sergeant on my new, we call it a shift. I was a shift commander. She was one of my sergeants, and she walks in and she says, "Mike, you've got really pretty good at playing the game." And I kind of took a step back, and I'm like, "Is that a compliment?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, 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 yeah." It didn't sound like a compliment, but I think it's funny that this idea that if you're not somebody, at least in the law enforcement world, constantly complaining about management and how bad they are and this, that, or the other thing, if you're trying to build a good relationship with your boss, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything they do, it could be, some people take that as
Mhm.
playing politics or sucking up and stuff like that. Um, I think there's a distinction there between what your intent is, right? Is your intent to is it self-serving? Are you trying to get promoted and that's why you're doing all these things to make your boss look good? Or is it because your job is to make your boss look good, and a great relationship with your boss also helps your team, right? What are your thoughts on those things?
Yeah, the first word that comes to mind is empathy. So
Okay. Yeah.
if any boss that you have, you want to understand what's being asked of him and what he's trying to do as a leader, and empathize with that. Empathize how busy his schedule is. Empathize that he might not always be able to get you all the information that you're looking for because he's moving from one thing to the next, and he just needs to give you the minimal guidance, and you need to take that, critically think about it, and then develop it into a plan that can help him achieve his goals. Um, and like you said, it's not about necessarily about kissing up, because you're you're the liaison to the people below you too. So if all you do is say yes, or you say we can do this, and keep taking on more things, and it starts to affect your formation, and you're adding more stress onto them. So it should be a balance of just self-awareness and knowing where your formation's at, what you can do, and then honestly communicating those expectations, but at the same time having empathy to what he's trying to accomplish. Um, and then building trust by just, again, it goes back to predictability, just being reliable. If he's a micromanager, you're any role that you step into. I always assume that people were micromanagers in the beginning, and I would over communicate. I would let them know like
Right.
what
Yes.
was what was happening, where things were at. I would ask them for feedback to make sure I was doing it right. Call them azimuth checks, like make sure that I'm meeting your intent with this. And then any time that he gave me direction, I would always back brief him on what he asked me to do, to make sure, just as a final check of like, this is what I've received. Is this exactly what you're looking for? Um, and then it would give him the opportunity to either correct me or dial me in more. But I think overall it comes down to the empathy, having empathy for your boss, knowing that he might be micromanaging because he feels like he's losing control over things. Um, and then doing everything to try to manage that relationship, either whether it's over communicating to him to help him feel more comfortable and in control, or overperforming or putting more work in to make him feel like you're a reliable person, and he can predict that when he gives you direction and guidance, that you're receiving it exactly how he intended to, and then executing.
Well, I'm definitely stealing two things from you, Drew. And they just happened. Empathy for your boss. I love the way you describe the idea that we don't ever think about empathy for our boss. I mean, I kind of touch on it in my class, but really, this idea is like sometimes we just are not aware of what the everything that's going on in their world. And I like that idea of empathy for the boss. Um, and Where did you come up with the theory that you're just going to assume, because in the military you end up working with people you've never met before, right? So you just assume that your boss is a micromanager right out of the box. I love that idea because it makes so much sense.
Yeah, yeah, because I think a lot of people come into the role kind of feeling everything out. Like they're they're trying to understand how their subordinates are working for them and what they can expect of them. So if you come in, assuming that they're feeling as if they've already planned on micromanaging, or they're going to be tying down, and then you prove that you're someone that doesn't need to be micromanaged, and you set that first impression with them that, like, I can handle what I'm doing. When you tell me to do something, it's going to get done whether you come and look at it or not, and then you build on that relationship from the start. Then it's not something that you have to backtrack on later. Um, and when he does, when if eventually they feel like they're starting to lose control and they start to micromanage, you've already
Yeah.
kind of built that relationship with them for them to know, like, I don't need to worry about this formation. They've always done what I've asked them to do, and always
Yeah.
over communicated and made me feel comfortable. And that, again, just ties back into the empathy for the leader of, you come into the position, I want to make you feel comfortable that when you tell us to do something, it's going to get done.
I mean, I've seen this so many times. A brand new lieutenant takes over a shift with a seasoned sergeant, and immediately the sergeant just assumes that, oh, this person's going to trust that I know what I'm doing. And if they don't, they're a micromanager if they ask me too many questions, right? I
Mm-hmm.
love your philosophy, like, because I think the one way you help a micromanager with themselves is you overfeed them with information, and like you said, you prove that you're going to provide, because micromanaging is just a lack of control, a lack of information is what they feel, right? And if we
Mm-hmm.
always just give it to them right out of the box, just like you say, I love that thought, because what happens is it's the combat and this is my experience. You have a micromanager. Oh, they don't trust me. I'm not going to provide them any additional information unless they ask for it, because they're going to ask for it. So I might as well wait for them to ask for it. And then it becomes a battle, as opposed to what you say. Why don't we just try to initially show them we're going to give them plenty of information? We're going to keep them informed of what's going on. They're going to feel like they're in control. And when a boss asks them, because a lot of times a micromanager is being micromanaged, right? They feel like they have all the information they need. That's great. Hey, listen, we're almost at 40 minutes. We'll probably do a five more, and then we'll open it up to some questions. I'm going to leave something. What is something that you'd like to talk about on the leadership side?
Let's see. I think I really the expectation management thing, or to know that when you go into a leadership position, your past experiences or your knowledge doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily need those things to be able to still be successful. Like, I've been in plenty of situations where I've had to lead people who were more experienced than me or more senior to me, and in those situations, it it switches the dynamic of, having more confidence in shaping a set of standards on your own, if you're dealing with someone who's less experienced underneath you, to it being more of a conversation of what is expected of you and how you best support that person. Because, like I said, when I was a headquarters company commander, I had the brigade commander in my company. I had a handful of majors, and that the dynamic shift in that, um, it it was a very different level of leadership. It wasn't me telling them what to do. It was like, me asking them how I can best support them, asking, what would help make their job easier with me being in my position. And I think that mentality comes down to a lot of just a world, a view of knowing that everyone, when you have an organization, one, you shouldn't assume you're the smartest person in the room, and then two, understanding that you're while your job is to be the leader, you're doing a job that comes with a set of expectations, and everyone in the formation is doing their own job that comes with a certain set of expectations. And it's looking at yourself as almost like an equal, but doing a different role, I think is very useful and allows you to transition your leadership skills to different positions where you might be sitting in a spot where you're trying to lead people that are higher ranking than you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I've never really had that experience because I mean, we don't really have anything similar to that normally in law enforcement where you would be kind of not really supervising, but kind of the division commander over people who outrank you. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't, but I mean, it can happen on certain occasions, like if you're dealing with a special detail or something like that. Like a
Mm-hmm.
football game would be a good example where a sergeant may be in charge of the entire operation, even though there's lieutenants working in that detail. Big football games like University
Mm-hmm.
of Florida versus Tennessee. Go Gators tonight at 7 o'clock. I'll be there. But that's awesome, dude. Now listen, I want to open it up to some questions. I got something from George. Oh, I think it is our job to let our subordinates know what is expected of us. I always try to communicate. Oh, I think he's just kind of talking about the idea that we need as he and I know George, he's a sergeant, right? He needs to talk to his folks about the expectations of his captain or his division chief, right? What are their
Mm-hmm.
expectations of the entire criminal investigations division?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really good point, right? We talk about our own expectations, but sometimes when we're having these meetings, let's talk about our boss's
Mm-hmm.
expectation. I think that's good. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, any type of mission planning that you do in the military, you're always going to talk about. You always brief the one level up and two levels up. So as a company, you'd brief what the battalion commander's intent and end state is, and then you'd brief the brigade commander's intent and end state, to give them that again that like holistic view of more of the why of as to why we're doing it. So yeah, I completely agree. I think that's really important.
Hey, if you have a question, all right, I love this one from Sarah. How would you best handle a subordinate who lacks motivation?
Hmm. So that one, it's always a tricky one because it's it's different for every situation. I think overall you need to you need to dive into why the person is unmotivated because again it could be a lot of different reasons. If they start off unmotivated, then it's it might just be their personality trait or their lack of experience at the time. Um, the military again is different because you can use different forms of like pain, whether it's push-ups or I mean not as an officer, but as an NCO. Like if you have an unmotivated soldier, there's different techniques to use at different times. But the I think one trying to understand the source of the problem, and then it might be just a situation of having more touch points with them or more feedback, or it could be trying to find what it is that motivates them. Because I think another part of being in an organization is understanding that every person is different, and then if a soldier might be doing one job that doesn't really motivate them, but they might be really good at something else, and it's understanding where to place those soldiers throughout the formation to get the most like use out of them and to make the things run more efficiently. Because a soldier that's acting as a saw gunner might you know have more skills in Excel or might have more organizational mindset rather than just being a shooter. So he might be better moved to being in headquarters to help out with different things like that. And I think, yeah, just like trying, hopefully, one, figuring out the source of the problem and what it is that's making them not motivated. And if something else makes them more motivated, then moving them into that spot.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And I think it all starts with having a relationship with that member. I mean, you're going to be able to see maybe some of their demotivation. You'll be able to ask whether it's something going on in the family, right? Something going on in the house, and which is in our world that happens quite a bit. People go through whether their wife or their spouse gets ill. That's a big one that we have to deal with a lot, or the idea of divorce and breakups. I mean, we have to deal with that too. So that source is a big deal. But if it's not that, sometimes we got to look at ourselves, right? I have to say that sometimes you got to look at yourself and say, hey, listen, am I the source of their demotivation? Is it something I am doing? And you got to be open to that conversation. Like, I don't want to say it, but am I a micromanager? Am I pushing them in the too hard on this one thing? And maybe we can come to an agreement on what they think is important, what I think is important, and what the mission is and stuff like that. So,
Mhm.
and I know that I've done that in the past, and sometimes we got to look at ourselves. All
Mhm.
right, we got a bunch of questions rolling in here, dude. In the question section, I'll do this one first, and I'm going to do one from David Eric Beckwith. I got you, Denton, Texas. I got you in a second. You're coming up next. I read a book on small unit leadership by Dandridge Malone, and he suggested a matrix of able, unable, and unwilling, unwilling. And the able but unwilling is a disciplinary matter. Able but willing leaves them alone. Willing but unable teach. Unwilling, unable terminate. Well, that'd be great. I don't know if you've ever tried to fire somebody in the law enforcement in the government world, but it's almost impossible.
Mhm.
Now, military, you guys have probably a little bit more sticks. In the law enforcement world, we have some, but it's civilian sector is a lot different than the military.
Yeah, the military, you have the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So there's, like I said, for NCOs, it might be making them do push-ups or doing on-the-spot corrections. Um, as an officer, it's more of the military justice side of like if a soldier is continually messing up, you do things to maintain the discipline, and that again, I think that comes down to building trust with the rest of the formation too. Because if you have other people working in the formation and they see that a soldier who's being unmotivated and not doing his job and is not uh, acting as he should, not having any repercussions come down on him, then it starts to erode the trust and the motivation of other people because they feel like that person's not being disciplined for the negative things that they're doing, and it, it's yours. I think it's your responsibility to instill discipline at that point in through whatever techniques or resources that you have available to do that for the sake of the people that are working well and are motivated.
I mean, such a big deal, right? And we never think about that, that we're allowing this to occur and it's affecting the motivation of everybody else on our team sometimes. Great
Mm-hmm.
point, Drew. I mean, I didn't think about that, but you're so right. All right, Eric, how do you combat the spread of negativity and try to move the focus to the positives? And this might be organizational negativity, right? Because law enforcement's in a little bit of a tough spot right now, depending on
Mm-hmm.
where you're at. But our staffing levels are lower than they've probably ever been, and some of the communities are basically flat out saying we don't even want police anymore. So it's in a weird state. What are your thoughts? I know the military goes through its ups and downs too.
Yeah. I think if you're a leader, you probably got to that position because you truly enjoy what you do, and you have it's in certain ways, at least for me, it feels like this is what I was born to do or what I love doing. So sharing that with your formation as much as possible, and like I said, the phrase I said before, it was something that one of my friends would say all the time. It was, if you can't get out of something, get into it. So if you're doing a job and you know you can't get out of it and you have to do it, just go full into it. And it might be being a little bit ridiculous about it and like having some false motivation, but eventually false motivation turns into real motivation, and you can find like a little bit of the stupidity of just acting motivated has a positive spread on everybody else. And whether it's like dark humor or stupid humor to help make light of the situation and help change positivity, whatever it is, as a leader you got to try to find the best in anything. And again, being tied in and empathizing with your formation and not ever trying to trick them or to say that they should be feeling a certain way when they're not. Like, always validate that it makes sense that you're feeling this way, but realize that if you can't get out of it, get into it, and try to turn that into motivation whether it's false motivation or whatever. There's plenty of times in the military you use false motivation to get people excited about doing something that they don't want to do.
Yeah, I always say that great leaders need to be optimists to a certain extent, right? I mean, if we're going to come into work and kick the dirt and say, "Oh, this sucks," I mean, how do you expect everybody else to feel, right? So, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes you got to put on that smile, even though you know what's about to happen. It's going to really stink. But hey, man, hey, take a second, type that into the chat so everybody knows that saying. I love it. Is it
Mm-hmm.
if you can't get out of it, just get into it? I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll type it in there.
That's something people need to post on their wall. You can't get out of it, get into it. I love it. All right, I think this might be our last question. This is not going to be an easy one, by the way. If you see it's coming from David R. How do you deal with a member of the agency who outranks you that is the complete opposite of a predictive supervisor, and you don't know what person you will interact with from day to day, right? How do you deal with how would you deal with that, or have you had to deal with that in the past?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think that for someone who is in that type of mindset, it just again just comes down to over communicating with them or getting to know them better. Because if you're again, it comes down to empathy for that leader, and if it's somebody that you don't know or you can't understand, then you're not going to be able to empathize with them. And the only way to try to move closer to being able to empathize with them is getting to know them better. Um, and if that leader is having an effect on everything that your formation is doing, or it's making you not be able to relay, his intent or the whys to your formation, then again, as that liaison, you have just as much a responsibility to your formation to get to know that person better, so that you can help lead your formation better by knowing them and being able to empathize with them. So um, I think it comes down to just trying to be more of to build that friendship or that relationship with them to just better understand them, or why they're doing that, to help. If they're not helping you predict their actions, then you need to get to know them better so that you can try to predict when they're going to be like that or why they're being like that.
And I think you make a great point here, Drew, is that we have an easy time building a relationship with people that we like, right? Oh, sure, but this boss doesn't sound like somebody who's very easy to get along with. And maybe it's up to that person to go to them and say, hey, boss, what are you doing Tuesday? Hey, let me take you out to lunch or something like that. Let's go break bread. Let's get to know each other a little bit better. Hey, can I buy a cup of coffee? I know a great place down the street that just opened. They serve the best cup of coffee. Whatever those things are, go out of your way. And I know really it's the boss's job to do it. I get that, but go
Yeah.
out of your way maybe to try to build a better relationship, to try to get to know them. And then I think that will help. That makes
Yeah.
sense. I mean, if you have a relationship with somebody, they're going to become more predictable to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're
That's
exactly right. And that kind of plays into leading up. Like if there's something that you think he should be doing that he's not doing, and then you take the steps to try to make those things happen. At the end of the day, whether he thinks it was his idea or your idea, it doesn't matter. It reaches you to that endpoint and helps you lead your formation below you in a better way. And I think that's your responsibility to do that.
all right. I think that's going to do it for us, everybody. Give me 1 second. We may take a last second question. Does anybody have one last second we can throw up there? All right. Well, I appreciate it, everybody being here. Again, like I said, we are looking for host locations in 2024. That's kind of where we're booking right now. We can probably do something. You guys know what we do: investigations, leadership training, field training officer training. That's kind of where we what we do. Everything we do is a 2-day training, and we'll travel anywhere in the United States. So, Drew, parting words. Anything else you'd like to say?
No, it was a great experience. Thanks for inviting me on. Thank you to everyone who signed on and listened. Hopefully, some of the things I said made sense, and you took some things away. But overall, I was very happy to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Hey, from the minute I told Drew about doing this webinar, I have never heard anything except, man, I can't wait to do it. Drew, I have a feeling this is your first one. I have a feeling you're going to be doing tons more of these before you're done. You're younger than I was before I even thought about starting to get it. I don't even think I picked up my first leadership book until I was 30 something, early 30s, finally. But because I thought at the time that you either were or you weren't. I didn't realize it's really a learned thing. And golly, I just had a wonderful time talking with you. And good luck in Austin with your degree. And I know we'll stay in touch.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, for everybody else, advancedpoliceconcepts.com. We'd love to or reach out to us and email us. And we'll see you later.